Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago has warned that the direct and indirect costs of recent unrest in South Africa will likely further slow economic recovery. President Cyril Ramaphosa also warned that the impact of the riots can't be underestimated, since KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng account for 50% of the GDP. And joining us is Wits School of Economics and Finance lecturer Lumkile, Mondi, and Institute for Economic Justice co-director Coleman. Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I'll begin with you, Lumkile. When one looks at the approach that the president took, especially when you took office, there was somewhat of an investment, led recovery strategy that he was putting in place in order to try and put South Africa on a path of economic recovery. But now we saw the recent unrest coupled with the pandemic. Would you say that these have worked?
So the investment-led economic recovery was supported by many of us, particularly focusing on infrastructure, rail, road, network, that's ICT, as well as electricity. So that approach, I think, was holistically supported by many South Africans, given the deficiency that we've seen. Secondly, with the health crisis that came at the back of the economic and financial crisis, which had led to the investment-led recovery, was not handled very well by the president. Remember, it wanted us to put pressure on him. I think institutions like the IEJ and many others, including academics, put pressure on the president to provide a stimulus for business, but also to provide support for the majority of South Africans who were going to be laid off due to the lockdown, as well as those who were suffering already due to the unemployment that we'd seen. That led to the TERS program. So really, subsequent to that, there have been various lockdowns with no support at all, in fact. So arguably, the 10% that we asked for of our economy, which we expected to go into the economy, was never put by the president as an investment support program. Secondly, there's been no support for small business, nor for the unemployed. So really, we're very disappointed. We hope that tonight the president will tell us exactly how he's going to be supporting small businesses, how he's going to be supporting the poor and marginalized, and whether, in fact, is not the time now for him to talk big by introducing a basic income guarantee.
Do you share in this disappointment, Neil?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've seen South Africa go through three major crises. There was the crisis before COVID, where we were running into a deep recession. There was the COVID crisis, which has seen 1.4 million jobs lost and massive hunger amongst our population. And then there's the crisis that we've seen with the looting in the last week, where between 50 and 100 billion rand has been lost in productive assets. Now, each of those crises requires specific responses which are appropriate to those crises. With the COVID lockdowns, the IEJ, as Lumkile has said, and a number of other commentators said that there was a need, because of the lockdown, to provide both relief and a stimulus, which we've seen introduced in many countries around the world. And if you look at the G20 countries of which we are part, the average stimulus there has been about 10% of GDP, whereas our stimulus, according to the IMF, is around about 4% of GDP. So we are lagging the rest of the world. As Lumkile has indicated, many of the relief measures which were promised in the 500 billion rand package either haven't materialized or have been terminated prematurely. So like the COVID, the special relief of distress grant, the 350 rand grant, the caregivers grant, et cetera, were terminated. Many of the other relief measures to particular sectors were terminated. We've seen the credit guarantee scheme continue, but only about 14 billion of the 200 billion rand, which was promised, actually materialized. The government's reconstruction and recovery program really focuses on medium-term sectoral interventions, procurement strategies, local, buying local, procuring local, et cetera, et cetera. And those can only kick in the medium term. We have an immediate crisis, which has now been worsened by the looting, and therefore there need to be immediate emergency measures, which the IEJ has proposed over the next few months requires a 70 billion rand injection to extend the COVID grant, to extend the TERS scheme, to give sectoral relief, tax benefits to business, etc. And over and above that now, we need to relieve businesses which have been massively devastated in Gauteng and KZN by the looting. So we hope the President will come up tonight with a meaningful relief package. I don't often agree with the EFF in many respects, but I think the one thing that they're correct on is that just announcing different lockdown levels and restrictions is not a strategy. You need a holistic, coherent strategy which adapts and modulates your economic measures based on the realities which your industries and your households and individuals are facing. And we haven't been seeing that. A health response by itself will not address this crisis. And we're now facing a whole lot of social pathologies, which are a reflection of these deep socio-economic crises which are affecting our communities. Deep hunger will result in deep anger.
And Lumkile, when one looks at another aspect of this is going to really try to limit or even cushion the blow when it comes to investors and future investment, because a number of people have been saying that there's going to be quite a serious impact that is felt in the future investments of the country, especially when you look at what we've seen during these past 2 weeks in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. But another thing, though, for government to also show that it is in control of the crisis, it's going to be important for them to speak in one voice and for the President to be seen to be taking decisive action in this regard.
Absolutely. I think many of us have been calling for a cabinet reshuffle because many of our ministers are simply not fit for purpose. We've seen with the security cluster, extremely weak, outdated, focused only on internal party politics, not the national interest, where we want to see our national security playing. National interests, long-term support for sustainability of South Africa and South Africa as a country. So there, the President will do himself a favor by sending a signal there to business specifically that the property, as our Constitution provides, that property will be protected at all times by our security forces. But more importantly also, outside that the cabinet itself is aligned to a state that intervenes and provides relief and a long-term economic growth. So there is a gap in the finance ministry around taking seriously the depth of the problems that Neil was speaking to, particularly around farming, that families, children-headed and female-headed families are going on farming, that we cannot live in a country like that. So the finance ministry has to come with a relief package to support the president. So these are quite critical issues which the president, which business and other stakeholders would like to see them being taken seriously. Because if you don't act on them, if some of those that were engaged in mobilizing people to ban and destroy infrastructure aren't held accountable, then really the trust and long-term investment trajectory of South Africa will remain quite tainted. That is why we expect the President today to really go big, not only on the relief measures that Neil was talking about, of about 70 billion, a change in his cabinet, but at the same time, a signal that he's a president that needs to be respected by all South Africans, and is providing leadership so that we can get our country back to where it's supposed to be.
And Neil, you know, what Lumkile is mentioning is something so critical, the provision of leadership at a time like this, making sure that we know that South Africa has a leader and it is going in one direction. But what we've seen has been somewhat of, in fact, not even somewhat, has been different messaging, really. You'd hear members of the security cluster, one pulling the other into the other direction. Really, that doesn't even go as far as inspiring confidence when it comes to future investment.
Yes, and the most important confidence that we need to inspire is in South Africans and South African investors and the ordinary people of this country. I would agree with Lumkile, the key problem areas that need to be addressed are the security cluster and the economic cluster. And with the economic cluster, in particular the Treasury and the Finance Minister, who provided absolutely no direction. In fact, if anything, they've acted as an obstacle consistently, for example, to the rolling out of relief measures, to the rolling out of a basic income grant, to support to business and so on. This is no time to be holding tight onto the purse strings like miserly accountants when we need to be injecting resources into the economy. I mean, even the International Monetary Fund has said we need to do what it takes, you need to spend what it takes to revive your economies and just keep the receipts. That was what the head of the IMF said. Now, the approach has been very different. You know, the softest target in South Africa at the moment is the president, because the president and the government have made some serious errors. But I think, you know, sniping at them and criticizing them and attacking them at this point, as much as that criticism is warranted, is not going to move us forward. So as Lumkile said, we need to pull together around a national plan to address this crisis, and we hope the president is going to give some leadership on that tonight. I think it's highly unlikely that he's going to announce a new cabinet tonight. I think, you know, that'll come. That'll come in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. But what he's more likely to do is to announce amendment of the lockdown regulations as well as a rescue package. And there has to be sufficient in that announcement to give South Africans hope that real alleviation of this misery and this crisis that businesses and households are facing is actually going to be implemented not in a month's time, but in the next number of days and weeks.
I'll tell you what, Neil, he finds himself under pressure tonight and even in the coming days to reshuffle his cabinet as much as he faces the pressure to recover the economy. Thank you so much to you both for your time.